3 days ago, 4 human beings splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, having traveled farther from Earth than any human being in the entire history of our species. 4,600 miles beyond the Moon, carried there by the most sophisticated propulsion system our civilization has ever constructed, returning through an atmosphere that subjected their capsule to temperatures of 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit at 35 times the speed of sound. The first crewed lunar flyby since Apollo 17 in 1972. Humanity, after 50 years of earthbound patience, reaching again for its oldest frontier. I watched the coverage with the particular electricity that only genuine civilizational achievement produces, that rare sensation of being alive at a moment that'll appear in history books, of witnessing our species do something that required every accumulated insight from Newtonian mechanics to quantum materials science to pull off. And carried by that feeling, I did what I've always done. I loaded a game. Specifically, Starfield, Bethesda's $100 million love letter to cosmic human ambition, set against the very backdrop of interstellar exploration that the Artemis crew had just made feel real again. Bethesda's first question to me, before a single star rendered, before a single planet materialized, before I'd chosen a faction or held a weapon or taken one step into the universe they'd spent years constructing. Are you body type 1 or body type 2? Movement type 1 or movement type 2? What are your pronouns? 4 astronauts had just traveled farther from Earth than any human being in recorded history, and the most expensive, most technologically sophisticated, most creatively ambitious entertainment medium our species has ever produced opened with a gender identity declaration lifted wholesale from an American university HR onboarding document. That distance between what our civilization's capable of and what certain studios have decided this medium should prioritize is the entire subject of this video. Because the moment that screen appeared, something else came back with it. The memory of why I'd never finished Starfield the first time I tried it years ago. That same low-grade deflation, that same quiet severance from the fantasy before it had even begun, until I'd logged off and gone back to Crimson Desert, where a man in wolf pelt and chains was simply waiting for me to play. The contrast, sitting there in that moment, was almost too clean to be accidental. One screen asked me to declare what I am. The other invited me to become something greater. And the studio that made the latter, working with a fraction of Bethesda's budget, operating entirely outside the institutional apparatus of Western AAA development, understood something about this medium that Bethesda, with all its resources and all its history, had deliberately chosen to abandon. The irony is that physics didn't give them a choice. Bethesda themselves had to code biological sex into Starfield's engine. Physics simulation, animation rigging, character geometry, all require the biological binary to function. And then, having built it, having implemented it at the level of fundamental system architecture, they renamed it. Male became body type 1. Female became body type 2. The biological fact was preserved in the engine while being laundered out of the language, and that gap between what they built and what they were willing to call it tells you everything you need to know about the sincerity of the ideology behind it. You only euphemize what you can't defend openly. If body type 1 and body type 2 represent a genuinely held philosophical conviction about the nature of human identity, the intellectually honest position is to state it plainly, defend it in the language you actually mean, and stand behind it in public. But the retreat into clinical abstraction, into the sterile bureaucratic vocabulary of institutional compliance, is the behavior of an ideology too internally fragile to survive its own direct articulation. They built the biological binary because the universe required it, then laundered it through progressive institutional language because their internal culture demanded the performance of its denial. Cowardice, given a marketing budget, dressed as inclusion, shipped to 100 million players worldwide, as though the distinction between the two were invisible. The philosophical dishonesty, however, is only half the crime. The character creation screen reveals something deeper, a fundamental misunderstanding of what games are for. Every significant RPG in the history of the form has understood that its first question must orient the player toward the world rather than toward themselves. Who will you become? Warrior or mage? Human or elf? Noble or outlaw? The question's aspirational by construction, designed to dissolve the self into possibility, to extend an invitation to inhabit something larger than daily circumstance. This isn't incidental to the medium. It's the form's central promise, the thing that distinguishes it from every other artistic tradition. Not the passive reception of someone else's experience, but the temporary assumption of an identity not your own. Starfield's first question inverts this architecture completely. Before the fiction's materialized, before the escapism can take root, before the world's made its opening gesture toward the player, the screen demands a real-world identity declaration, forces the player to import their contemporary, politically categorized self into a space that was supposed to offer temporary release from exactly that self. The aspirational question, the question that every great RPG opens with, that made grown men cry over Arthur Morgan and made Geralt of Rivia beloved across every culture on Earth without translation or qualification, has been replaced with something closer to a customs form. And in that replacement, the mechanism by which the medium works, the ego dissolution that's the source of its particular power, is severed before it can begin. This failure of understanding doesn't exist in isolation. It's the local symptom of an institutional disease operating at a far larger scale, one that demands to be named with the same precision its proponents apply to the phenomena they critique. What Bethesda's character creation screen represents, what the broader, decade-long trend of identity politics in AAA game design represents, is the most brazen act of cultural colonization in the history of this medium. Consider the genuine global footprint of a title like Starfield. A player in Krakow encountering it for the first time, someone in Casablanca, a gamer in Bangalore reaching for an hour of escape after a 12-hour shift, a young man in Seoul. Their first interaction with this product of the most powerful and best-resourced entertainment industry on Earth is mandatory navigation of the gender identity taxonomy of a specific American coastal institutional subculture, a worldview cultivated in particular university departments, particular HR frameworks, particular consultancy firms operating within a particular cultural moment in a particular country, whose population represents roughly 4% of the humans who play this game. Body type 1 and body type 2 aren't merely clumsy formulations. They're linguistically untranslatable into most human languages, a fact that exposes the ideology's parochialism with a precision no cultural critic could improve upon. Arabic encodes grammatical gender at the level of verb conjugation, rendering the concept these terms attempt to express literally inexpressible within the language's own architecture. The same is true of Hindi, Spanish, Russian, French, and the majority of the world's most widely spoken tongues. The ideology fractures against basic linguistics, against the deep structural reality of how most of humanity organizes its perception of the world, because it wasn't designed for most of humanity. It was designed for a room and exported as though it were a universal. A recently circulated academic paper from the University of Melbourne argues that gaming culture's been weaponized for political ends. Where the paper collapses is in its spectacular blindness to the weaponization it's itself participating in, to the exercise of institutional power sitting directly beneath its language of inclusion and diversity. For 30 years, Western studios produced archetypes so mythologically coherent and so fully realized in their masculine specificity that players from every culture on Earth adopted them without friction or translation. A Korean teenager, a Brazilian teenager, a Polish teenager, all understood Geralt of Rivia immediately. Not because Geralt's a specifically Western character, but because he's a specifically human one, drawing on an archetypal tradition that transcends every particular cultural context and that every human civilization has independently recognized as worth preserving. And then, gradually, something was excised from that tradition without announcement, without artistic rationale, without any public accounting for what was being removed or why. The jawline, the silhouette, the moral weight carried without apology, the motivation rooted in something older and less provisional than therapeutic processing. Shepard became Ryder between Mass Effect entries. The masculinity smoothed off the franchise's face so incrementally that no single decision could be isolated as the cause. Broad shoulders became ambiguous frames. Scarred faces became smooth, algorithmically inoffensive features, engineered to provoke no strong response in any direction. Dragon Age Veilguard, Avowed, Redfall, Forspoken. A decade of AAA protagonist design in which the masculine aesthetic tradition that every human civilization on Earth independently developed, preserved, and considered worth passing to its children, has effectively ceased to exist. The Spartan and the Samurai and the Zulu warrior and the Viking and the Chinese Daxia and the Rajput and the Ottoman Janissary and the Mongol, each arising from a completely distinct cultural context, each independently arriving at the warrior-hero archetype, specifically, mythologically, unapologetically masculine, as the central figure of its storytelling tradition. Joseph Campbell spent a lifetime documenting this pattern across every culture that's left a record, and his conclusion was unambiguous. This isn't a construct. It's not a manufactured identity. It's not the product of magazine advertising or toy marketing campaigns. It's the oldest story humanity knows how to tell, encoded across every language, every mythology, every artistic tradition our species has produced, across the full span of its recorded existence, because it encodes something true about what human beings are and what human beings need. A cluster of studios in North America decided, on behalf of 8 billion people, drawing on no democratic mandate, no cross-cultural consultation, no engagement with the civilizational consensus stretching back to Homer and Gilgamesh, that it was a pathology requiring correction. And it fell to studios operating entirely outside that institutional apparatus to simply refuse. Korea held the line. Pearl Abyss and Shift Up, apparently never having received the memo that masculine archetypes had been scheduled for institutional retirement, built Crimson Desert's protagonist the way every civilization before this one built its warrior heroes. Broad, armored, wolf-pelted, scarred, carrying chains and a sword with the unstudied authority of someone who's never been invited to apologize for what he is. And the player's response to that character produced something that no amount of cultural criticism can fully account for. Relief. Genuine, physiological, unmistakable relief. The particular sensation of a deprivation ending, of something absent, suddenly restored. Relief's not a political position, and it can't be manufactured, and it can't be explained away by the frameworks that'd like to dismiss it. Because you don't feel relief unless deprivation preceded it. And the millions of men who experienced that response weren't reacting to polygon counts or lighting fidelity, but to the sudden reappearance, in a space they'd long since stopped expecting to find it, of a genuinely masculine archetype, offered without qualification, disclaimer, or apology. The market then confirmed, with the blunt empirical authority of commercial reality, what the body had already registered. Crimson Desert, Stellar Blade, Elden Ring, Monster Hunter Wilds. Every title that trusted its global audience with an unambiguous archetype met with unambiguous demand, while every title that substituted ideological compliance for archetypal honesty, Redfall, Suicide Squad, Concord, Veilguard, was punished with commercial failure, comprehensive enough to close studios and eliminate hundreds of livelihoods. An empirical pattern this consistent across this many titles has only one explanation: willful institutional blindness to the difference between what these studios believed their audience should want and what millions of actual human beings have made plain they do. The University of Melbourne paper closes with a question framed as an invitation. Games are political. What kind of politics do we want to play? And the answer, drawn from everything the evidence is made plain, is this: the politics of craft over compliance, of archetype over ideology, of trusting a genuinely global audience in Krakow and Casablanca and Bangalore and Seoul, with the full, mythologically honest, humanly complete spectrum of experience, including the dimensions that generate institutional discomfort in specific corners of specific American cities. By every institutional measure, we're the underdogs in this conversation, lacking the academic apparatus and the ESG frameworks and the peer-reviewed journals and the consultancy infrastructure. What we have is the relief, the sales data, and 8,000 years of independent civilizational consensus that the warrior archetype is worth something, that masculine heroism's a genuine and irreplaceable dimension of what it means to be human, not a historical accident awaiting administrative correction. They're very skilled at labeling, but they can't label away the grammar of Arabic or Hindi or Russian. They can't label away the Spartan or the samurai or the Zulu warrior. They can't label away the market, and they can't label away the relief that millions of men felt when a studio in Seoul simply put a man on the screen and said, "Here, this is what we're doing. Now play." To Pearl Abyss, to Shift Up, to the studios in East Asia who remembered what this medium is actually for. Humanity just sent 4 people farther into the dark than our species has ever gone, because we refused to stop reaching for the largest questions our existence poses. Games were supposed to be that same frontier. Not the frontier of personal identity declarations, not the frontier of a specific American institutional subculture's anxieties about gender. The frontier of our oldest myths, our deepest archetypes, our most fundamental stories about what it means to be human and what we're capable of becoming. That frontier was briefly captured by the smallest ideas our civilization has ever produced. You took it back. And for the first time in a long time, gaming feels like gaming again.